Okay, first off, I'm not the biggest fan of Nick Wright, so maybe I have a little bias in me, and you could take whatever I say with a grain of salt. Kinda like how you should take whatever Nick Wright says about LeBron James with that same grain of salt, since he just so happens to be represented by Clutch Sports. So I'm not sure about you guys, but have y'all noticed how the media have slowly turned their backs on Aaron Rodgers over the last few years? I recall a time when it was only Skip Bayless out of all the prominent media members who continue to shit on Rodgers, and maybe Greg Jennings too, here and there. But then slowly, we started to see guys like Shannon Sharpe and Nick Wright begin to change their stance on Rodgers and focus less on his talent and skills and more about his personality. Now mind you, there might have been other media heads that have changed their opinions on the QB, but these are the two main guys I've watched and noticed have a different take on him, and maybe rightfully so. Aaron, while on the Pat McAfee show, started to maybe get a little bit more political when it came to COVID and the vaccine. Some might say this all started when he became disingenuous about his vax status to the media, which kind of prompted all this backlash. They started using words and phrases addressing Rodgers as obtuse or acting like he's the smartest guy in the room. But to me, he's just someone who doesn't believe in the vaccine, and that's all. No different from the people who are pushing the vaccine, just on the other side of the spectrum. Anyways, Nick Wright of First Things First went on his podcast and unleashed on Aaron Rodgers, and I'm gonna pause in between and address some of the issues I had with his take, so have a listen.
So Aaron Rodgers went on McAfee's show. They were talking conspiracy theories that he may or may not believe, because he brought up the Super Bowl logo color scheme conspiracy theory that is very popular amongst the dumbest people on the internet. And Rodgers said, seemingly seriously, I just know next year's logo better have jet green in it. And then, for reasons I don't totally understand, AJ Hawk brings up the Epstein list that people thought was going to be released today or this week, when it was really just more redacted documents. There were going to be some names, but the idea that it was going to be a itemized person-by-person list was never really accurate if you actually followed any of the information, the actual information. And Rodgers said, essentially implied, I should say, to the layperson, that Jimmy Kimmel, who works for the same company, is nervous about this list coming in.
Okay, first off, Aaron Rodgers does not work for ESPN or Disney. He's a paid guest on the Pat McAfee show that licensed their program to ESPN. But I guess the distinction Nick might be making here is that Pat having Rodgers on his show could create problems with another Disney so-called talent in Jimmy Kimmel via ABC. Now regarding this clip, notice how most of the media people just started to label Aaron Rodgers as a conspiracy theorist because it totally changes how an average fan views him off the start. Honestly, outside of the COVID vaccine and UFOs, I don't know what else Aaron has talked about that might deem him as a conspiracy theorist. Nick Wright then alludes to the fact that Aaron is playing into the current conspiracy theory that has been going around the NFL as of late regarding the last 3 Super Bowl logos and the 2 teams that made it to the big game.
So the original thing was the past 3 Super Bowl logos all predicted the correct Super Bowl winners and the correct Super Bowl matchups. And this year's was supposed to be the Ravens versus the 49ers because there was red and purple in the logo.
Okay, I don't know about you, but I can't tell if Aaron Rodgers was being serious or not about that Super Bowl 59 jet green color scheme. I mean, the guy is on the Pat McAfee show and could very well just be messing around with the audience with a straight face, but for Nick to actually use this and run with it, I think was a little over the top. If it's something he brings up again in another interview, okay, maybe. But to be honest, I felt like Aaron was just screwing around with the whole Super Bowl conspiracy theory.
I would say, Pat and fellas, that if the Super Bowl is Baltimore and San Fran, and I tell you what, that Super Bowl 59 emblem better have jet green on it, because I know you've seen that one, Connor. That's a real interesting.
It's so utterly stupid and far-fetched because it's about the last 3 Super Bowls, which isn't even a really good sample size. Had it been maybe for the last 10 to 15 Super Bowls with that color scheme came into effect, then maybe yeah. It just seems like Nick Wright tried to discredit Aaron Rodgers on some wacky shit just to prove his point. Then the next part of Nick's rant, he discusses the Jimmy Kimmel Jeffrey Epstein comment that Aaron implied that Jimmy was perhaps on that list. I think most people took it the same way, but anyone can argue that maybe Rodgers was implying that Kimmel was worried for his friends who were on that list. Anyways, the issue on hand is that Jimmy Kimmel 2 years ago called out Aaron Rodgers for his vaccine stance.
Aaron Rodgers reportedly received a homeopathic treatment over the summer instead of the vaccine. You know, we should have known, because nothing says I heal myself with crystals like this haircut. I mean, that little knot on top. Aaron is a Karen. That's the fact of the matter. Needless to say, all this UFO talk has the tinfoil hatters going wild, including Green Bay whackpacker Aaron Rodgers, who offered this hot take on the Pat McAfee show.
I believe that this has been going on for a long time. Interesting timing on everything. There's a lot of other things going on in the world. Did you hear about the Epstein client list about to be released too?
For Jimmy to be a comedian, I think what Aaron said was fair game. If you're gonna throw strays, you best believe shit might come back at you. Some people might think joking about someone being a pedo is crossing the line. Bro, there are no boundaries if you're a true comedian. Everyone knows that. Man, y'all have heard Chappelle's bit about Anthony Bourdain's suicide or Bill Burr's infamous Philly rant? Man, I'm from the payphone pager era. There are no boundaries in comedy. Add on top of that, the shit Jimmy Kimmel will say on his show about the people who are unvaccinated and that they shouldn't be treated and left for dead. If that's considered a joke, then y'all should have no qualms with Aaron's pedo joke.
But I tweeted about this morning. Partially because I wanted to, and partially as a social experiment. And if you check the replies to the handful of tweets I sent, what you're going to see is people calling me a pedophile. People saying I'm nervous about the Epstein list. And Rodgers has become the voice in the sports world of some of the most deranged, unhinged people in our populace. And they often like to, and Rodgers is one of these people, like to pretend that this is a anti-vax thing. It flatly is not. As I mentioned on television, I will mention again. Kirk Cousins didn't get vaxxed. Nobody cares. I'm not certain, but I think Lamar Jackson didn't get vaxxed. Nobody cares.
Okay, Nick Wright has this totally wrong because, in a way, this is a vax versus anti-vax thing. For some disclosure, I am vaxxed because I needed it to travel. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have gotten the vaccine. But let me tell you why. This is because of Aaron Rodgers being unvaxxed. Nick tries to make a comparison that it isn't, using the example of Kirk Cousins and Lamar Jackson, but the only reason why they haven't been targeted by the mainstream media is because they don't promote it. Have you ever seen Kirk or Lamar telling their fans not to get the vax? No, they've admitted not having it, but they haven't gone out of their way like Aaron Rodgers, and that's the issue they have with him. They don't care if you're not vaxxed, but it's another thing if you spout that to your fan base. And look, I can get two shits. Whether someone is or isn't vaxxed, that's your prerogative. But the fact that Aaron Rodgers is one of the faces of the league and has a huge platform like the Pat McAfee show he gets on weekly with about 80,000 concurrent viewers, that's why you've started to see people criticize him so harshly. Like imagine if Stephen A. Smith all of a sudden started attacking Travis Kelce, who reportedly was paid $20 million for those Pfizer ads. Aside from some right-wing news sites, no one in the mainstream media has been critical of Kelce and his relationship with Pfizer. In regards to Nick discussing about the responses on Twitter, calling him a pedo and that maybe he was on that Epstein list, bro, this guy is seriously full of himself. Why the F would you be on that list? Yeah, he's an analyst and kind of a celebrity, I guess, but this guy is seriously taking these responses from random people to heart. Like, who the hell cares what people tweet back at you? It's effing Twitter. Like, I couldn't believe he actually went there. Is this guy retarded or something?
Is the man retarded?
Shouldn't use that word, but sure.
Developmentally disabled.
And it is a cop-out, in my opinion, to then use that decision as a shield against any future criticism you get, as a way to be like, no, the only reason you don't like me, the only reason you're criticizing me is because of my vax status.
He didn't want to get the vax and misled the public, and that's it. It's not the first time an athlete's lied in public and won't be the last. And this is what the entire mainstream media is focused on. Do you all not remember the vaccine card scam going around the NBA and NFL giving out fake vaccine cards? I think this was way worse than what Rodgers did, but this barely got any news coverage for some odd reason. It was reported that 3 Bucks players were caught, with one being Antonio Brown, but you and I sure as hell know that more players from both sports were probably using these cards.
And Rodgers said something the other day that went kind of by the wayside, and I heard it, but I didn't know what it meant, so I Googled it. And it was once again when he was saying everyone's mad at him about his vax status, and you should have disclosure vax status before you criticize him. And he said it's because I took on the alphabet mafia and the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And I had never heard the term alphabet mafia, so I Googled it. So alphabet mafia is about, and you know what, I'll read it exact. Alphabet mafia meaning, at least this is what the internet tells me it means. It's about the LGBTQ community. And it's about folks, I think it's got a relation to pronouns and the fact that LGBTQ now has even more letters with it. That's LGBTQIA+.
I will never apologize for standing up for an LGBTQ2+.
So here's why that was noteworthy to me, that Rodgers threw that out there. I obviously am very highly critical of Aaron and this person he's become. I would bet my life he's not homophobic. I'm very confident in that. So I think he used that term not knowing what it meant. It was just, he is so deep in the toxic internet brain vortex that it got lumped in with the mass delusion psychosis he talks about and the Super Bowl logo memes and the debate me bro to Fauci and the Epstein list. It all is just one stew of a brain that's been melted.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
Alright, I think I gave Nick Wright way too much credit for being an intellect. How the hell did he not know what the alphabet mafia was? But actually in this case here, it wasn't about the LGBT, but more so the FBI and CIA that Aaron Rodgers was referring to. Also, Aaron Rodgers hasn't become a different person, it's just y'all covering him in a different light now that he made a few of his controversial opinions open to the public. It's so funny how he tries to make Rodgers sound crazy by talking about that Super Bowl conspiracy theory, Epstein list, which isn't a conspiracy. He's just trying to lump all this stuff onto Rodgers and portray him as some sort of whack job. Listen, I think the media has done a great job of silencing certain narratives and labeling them as conspiracy theories. But let me ask you this, if 20 years ago I were to have told you that the government via the NSA were going to spy on all their citizens through their cell phones, that would have been deemed a conspiracy theory.